Olá, boa tarde a todos. Este é mais um evento do nosso 17º Festival Internacional de Flautistas da Associação Brasileira de Flautistas, né? Estamos no terceiro dia do nosso curso de Pedagogia da Flauta e o nosso convidado é o professor Anders Chapelon, né, da Academia de Malmo, da Academia de Música de Malmo, da Suécia, né, da Universidade de Lund. E a nossa temática de hoje é métodos e materiais para o ensino da flauta, né? Nós agradecemos a todos envolvidos neste evento e também a todos aqueles que estão conosco aí pelo YouTube, né? É importante dizer que a realização deste evento tornou-se possível com os recursos da Lei Aldir Blanc, através do Governo do Estado de São Paulo, por meio da Secretaria de Cultura e Economia Criativa. Valentina, você está aí? Você quer dizer alguma coisa?
Queria dar boa tarde a todos, né? Agradecer mais uma vez de coração ao Anders, que está aqui com a gente, né, no nosso terceiro dia. A gente tem o privilégio e a alegria de ter você com a gente durante esses 3 dias, né? Lembrando para todo mundo que está assistindo pelo YouTube, que se vocês quiserem acompanhar pelo PDF, né, o que o Anders está dizendo, quem já baixou, né, de ontem e de anteontem já está lá, mas quem ainda não baixou, vocês têm um link para baixar da nuvem ali, vai estar nos comentários também do YouTube. Aí vocês podem acompanhar melhor. Então, vamos, né, agradecer aqui a
Valentina,
presença. Diga.
mais uma coisa, é o seguinte, quem quiser fazer perguntas, pode postar a pergunta aí no chat do YouTube mesmo. Nós vamos coletando aqui as perguntas durante a palestra e nós passamos aqui em determinados pontos para o Anders, tá bom? Então, ele vai parar em alguns pontos da palestra e nós passamos as perguntas para eles. Mas coloque as perguntas para a gente poder ir encaminhando, tá bom?
Isso, procurar não deixar todas as perguntas para o final, né? Que as
Isso.
perguntas vão sendo passadas para ele de acordo com o assunto que a gente está falando sempre no final de cada tópico. Então, boa palestra para vocês. Good afternoon, Anders. And it's a pleasure to have you here another time.
All right, then I'm happy to start again. Before we start, I would really thank you all, Rogero, Ananias, Silvana, Rachel, Alison, Julia, Aldo, Valentina, Ariadne, Raul, Tonino. Maybe I forgot many people, but still, it is a great honor to be a part of your wonderful initiative. I'm really happy about that, and I congratulate you that you got support from the government, if I understood it correctly, and I think that's absolutely wonderful. Very good, so bravo. All right, today we are continuing under the umbrella tradition and freedom, and maybe go a little bit less on freedom, but on the tradition, and to take a look at quite some flute methods over 300 years. But just before we start, I would like to say that the PDF file, which you have access to through Abraf, obviously there is so much material, so if we should discuss everything in depth, I think we need at least a week. So I will be a little bit fast in some things today, and give a hint. Here you can look for things when it comes to resonance or to sonfilet. If you would have questions that we by any reasons can't take up today, or maybe when you have read the document, if you had time to do so, you just ask Valentina, Tonino, the others in the staff, then you can send also to me with email, and I would be very happy to answer questions over email. It might come up maybe in 2 months, suddenly you read something that you think is strange, and then I will try to explain what I tried to express. So I hope that's clear. Yesterday we talked about maieutics, and then I thought yesterday evening, maybe I should be a little bit more clear, because it's not a familiar concept for everybody. So maieuthetics, it comes from Old Greek, also from the period of Socrates, and he is, so to speak, the central person when we talk about maieuthetics. It comes from there in Plato. And maieuthetics, the concept of maieuthetics is based on the idea, when Socrates coined this expression, it was based on a matter of fact that his mother was a midwife. And sometimes the maieuthetic idea of communicating and learning and teaching is connected to the idea of the midwife. We can say so. There is a woman, she's going to give birth to a child. And there is a midwife. The whole idea behind the midwife is that she has made babies too. She knows how to make a baby. She knows how to carry a baby, and all with that includes. And she knows how it is to give birth to a newborn baby. The pregnant woman that will give birth to a baby, and especially so, I could imagine if it's the first time, it might be a very special moment and also dangerous moment in some sense. She has never done it before, but the midwife has been around. She knows what this is all about. That is the point in the concept of maieuthetics and Socrates' use of the concept that the midwife has been there. She has made the baby, she has carried, she has given birth. So in a sense, she can assist the pregnant woman to give birth. But in one sense, the midwife can't do anything. The pregnant woman must do it by herself, the whole thing. And that is the whole point when we talk about that the Socratic method, when it comes to flute teaching, what we have been, and pedagogic and learning, is that the teacher, it doesn't really matter which level we are talking about, if it's we have children in Suzuki or a top student in playing the most complicated repertoire, whatever. The teacher has done it, has been there. And for the student, it is very probably a new thing. So we can give guidelines, but we can't say exactly what to do. And that is what we did discuss yesterday. We can say for quite a while, it can be good to have Sarah as a flute teacher. Then a little bit later, we have, I don't know, Cecilia as a flute teacher. Then we have Mark as a flute teacher. But there will come a moment, sooner or later, when the best flute teacher is you yourself, for you flute playing, because you know your body, you know what scares you, you know what you think is easy. That is the concept of maieuthetics. I don't know if there might be questions already on the subject, but I wanted to clarify that since yesterday, because if not, it sounds a little bit abstract, I could guess. Okay, we can return to that if it comes up the question. Then I would also like to comment on the idea of the intuition. We did talk quite a lot about it yesterday, but we had not time to look at one example that I had. And I don't know if it's possible to see, but you can also see it in your own document later on page 41 in my document. There is a figure number 6. And that figure shows a person using an arch and making archery. And the whole thing here is that when you practice, it's called kyodo. It's from the Middle Age, and I have practiced it for a little bit. It's an incredible thing, and you see what it looks like, a very special bow. When we practice kyodo, as you can see on the drawing, there is one arrow that is going to be shot very soon, and there is a second arrow that you hold in your right hand. Now Kenko, that is a very important person in the Japanese Middle Age, he has made a comment on this. And to make a long story short, is that the very experienced teacher in Kyoto, he suggests that you should only have one arrow and not two. Because when you have two arrows, you might subconsciously think, yes, if it doesn't work with my first arrow, then I have a second arrow. And we all know when we perform music, there is no second chance when we are on stage. We simply have to continue, which I have experienced even with academy professional training students. Sometimes there is a reminiscence from being much younger that you stop and you back 2 bars and you restart. We all know that doesn't work on stage. And knowing that, if we are not well prepared, of course, that is a horrible trigger of being nervous, because we know suddenly, everybody knows, on stage you can't do it. Maybe you can do it if you are James Galway. I have seen that. Very funny. James Galway works on stage and he makes a super mistake and he says, yes, okay, folks, we take it once more. Yeah, he can do it, of course, with his authority and with his, when he was younger, his incredible virtuosity, of course. But that is what I wanted to add to the act of intuition, that it is something that we do straight away, simply. There is not a second possibility. If we then go to a short look into resonance, and if we can go to, let's see which page that is. I don't know if you have that, Valentina, but if you have it, it is for page 43.
Anders, I have the thing that you have, so don't worry. If you say page, it will be the same.
So if you could find page 43 in the document that I did send today, it would be great. Because it has to do what we announced yesterday, but we did not really have time to make a deep dive into the idea of techniques for developing sound colors and resonance. When you roll up a little bit so we can see the drawing, there you can see there is a violinist, and you can see a tuning fork on this kind of a box, resonance box. The interesting thing with this drawing is that it very well gives an example that is easy to understand what actually happens when we are talking about resonance inside the cavity of the mouth and the throat. And we also have resonance focal points in the face, up here, there, different places. And that is very simple. That is that if we have, as I wrote in the text there, if the tuning fork is tuned, let's say A442, and the violinist plays exactly the same note, A442. Now, the exercise in this violin example is that if the sound is really well centered when the violin plays the A, and you are in a distance something, what you can see there, then the fork and tune we start to ring and make the A. And that is basically what we do. When we then play whatever note that has a frequency, let's say we take the A, 442, A1, the low A on the flute. Then, of course, we can play it with many variations inside the mouth, but there is something of a shape inside the mouth that is optimal regarding how to play the note. And it is a complicated thing to go through all these vowel sounds. We will look at some models on that very soon. But I will just give you a suggestion, and I have written about that in the text. And that is that if we think about two simple instruments, one instrument would be the Jew harp, you know, this doing, 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 doing instrument. And if you breathe in and out with open mouth, you can create, you can say E, A, O, E, and you can hear it. And you can make it with different intervals and pitches. And there is also one more instrument that is really very nice, and that is this, a nose flute. And the interesting thing is, if you take the nose flute and you play a note like that, and then you take up the flute or vice versa. You maybe start with the flute, you play the note, then you take the note on your nose flute, then you have to shape the mouth and the cavities exactly to get that note. Then you keep that in your mouth and you take up your flute. It doesn't work in all of the whole compass of the flute because it's so high register and to the lowest notes. And of course, it depends a little bit what you have for. I got a very good one from a friend in Brazil. But these very simple tools can explain very much when it comes to working with resonance. And I strongly invite you to do some experiments yourself with this, because it brings down the whole idea about vowels and resonance points in our face to something quite simple and easy to work with. I think maybe we could go to, let's see here, and we can go into a little bit of the techniques for developing sound cards and resonance, but I make it very briefly, short. I would like to start with a quote, and that is from Jean-Pierre Rampal. I have translated that to English, so it will be, a sound can always also vary depending on the performers and depends largely on the shape of the chin and the lips. On the other hand, of the inner cavity of the mouth and throat. We cannot talk enough about it. I personally think that the influence of the inner cavity is important and that it is partly responsible for the sound differences between two flutists. It's for sure like that. It's no discussion about it. And I think Rampal makes, he scores a good point here. Because as a matter of fact, of course, there are colleagues, and Raoul did send me a letter yesterday, and thank you very much, Raoul, because you also work with this and you have had the luck to work with a teacher working with that kind of things. But generally spoken, it's not so much about this. And I would guess that one reason, among many, is it's a bit tricky to do it because we can't really see what we are doing. And it's also related to language and pronunciation. But anyhow, I think this is an important statement that if possible, try to do this. Then, of course, there are different languages. French, Portuguese, Swedish, German, whatever, Chinese, Japanese. There is not only one way how to solve these questions. You have to do it in relation to your own language. We all know that. That is the way to go through. Still, of course, there are the formants, there are the vowels, and this is more like natural laws that we can't really change. But something that is really good in French language are the nasal vowels, on, that kind of things. And I think you have something sometimes in Portuguese, and then it could be good. If not, we simply learn them. In Swedish, we don't have them really. It's more in local versions of the language. The continuation of my text then is very much dealing with giving examples. There are examples from Peter Lloyd, from Alain Marion, from Marcel Guise, Michel de Bost, Jesse Dorman. But I think we don't need to read through them now. You can do that on your own. And I would like then to continue to, let's see which page is that. This is page 45. And on page 45, you can see these more anatomic drawings, and they are taken from a book. There are many books on singing, obviously, but this is by Lili Lehmann, and that is early 20th century, 1914. She was a great opera singer. And at the end of her life, she made these kind of things. And they are very instructive. Of course, you can find the same information in many places. But when we look at what is called figure 8, you can see the cavity of the forehead, high range, nasal cavity. I guess that's where they take the test for the COVID. And then you have the mouth, so to speak. The soft palate is movable, and it goes down in the throat. This is, I don't know how you call that in Portuguese language, but in French style, that is often called that to play in the mask, as in the face, that we also have this resonance possibilities. Then Lehmann, she defines, and she was a soprano, she defines the register in high range, middle range, and low range. And there you can see her high range is from A2 and upwards. Yeah, we can say that is, for the flute, it's a good idea. Middle range is low F to middle A, and everything below is F1 and down, if we play with B foot, for example. And I think the picture on figure 9 is interesting because she has, so to speak, focal points inside the palate. It is a kind of abstract, but when I work on this very much with myself, then if I try to say, for example, E, D, and then I can orientate myself in the mouth and I can find something there. And the text explains more about that. Let's see if we could roll down to, let's see here which page that is. Let's see here. We have, I think that is clear. Then I would like, if we could go to page 46. As I have mentioned before, and I will mention again, the difference between the traverso and all these different kinds of flute models in between, up to our cylinder flute, the bone flute. Of course, there are very big differences regarding certain things, but there are also very big similarities. And maybe you have read text by Michelle Castellengo. She is an old lady now. She is an acoustician, doctor in acoustics in Paris. And she has made extensive research on flutes. That happened in the 1960s and the 1970s. I got a clue about that. I got some text from her. If someone is interested, you can just download Michelle Castellengo at the internet and you find loads of texts. I think they're all in French. And so I did contact Madame Castellengo and went to her university and made some experiments. And that is interesting because someone yesterday or the day before talked about vibrato. And actually I went to her to make some investigations regarding vibrato because she had a nice machine so you could play a note and you could draw your vibrato. You saw a kind of a line. It was very interesting to do that. Anyhow, this Swiss flute player, Peter, he made a little book that was a private edition. He made a book about resonance for traverso playing, and that works wonderfully well on the bone flute as well. And he then talked about chest resonance, mouth resonance, and head resonance, and basically made categories of registers, which is very similar to how the singer made it. He also gave a good idea to vertical, up, down, horizontal, back, front. Also, you play in the front of the mouth, you play in the back of the mouth, you play up here in the head, and you play down somewhere, and you even direct it downwards. On page 46, there is also a very good quote, and that is by the French flautist René Leroy. He was a very famous player in his heyday. He was so famous, so when he went to New York, he stayed over in the White House of the American president. Anyhow, he have some comments on that, and if you stop there, you can see he wrote that continuous adaptation of the oral cavity during play is a necessity. It follows that the adaptation of the lips, however great it may be, is not sufficient to ensure the fullness of the sound, the homogeneity, and the quality of the timbre. So there we have a very good example. What he does not give in his book is a more method how to encounter that. If we roll down to the next picture, there, figure 10, that is also from Lili Lehmann. And there you can see there are focal points, and that goes from a low A up to F3. So we can imagine, for example, if I would play an A2, the middle A, it should come here somewhere. And we can work on this kind of focal points. And as a matter of fact, that is what singers do. We can also see the lines when you have the lowest notes, so from C and below, low C and below, that there are focal points that go straight down to your chest and your breastbone. And all this works wonderfully. It takes some time to get used to it. If we go down to the next picture, as a figure 11, you can see if you go up just a little bit there, yes. This is from Peter's book, Oscar Peter. And there you can see Kopfregister as a high register, mouth register, and the low register, chest register. This is also very instructive. And I guess many of you are familiar to these kind of techniques. But as a matter of fact, sometimes if you feel a sound here in the back of your head, it sounds a little bit esoteric, but that kind of stuff, as a matter of fact, works quite nicely. And you can also see in figure 12, there I compare Peter, the traverso player, with Lehmann, the singer. And I have not adjusted to make it to be so similar. It is simply what happened. I think we can continue. Let's see which page that is. Yes, if we then look at page 49, there is a very simple little musical example. It is explained quite in detail. I don't think that's necessary to do now. And if you roll down a little bit more, there is then figure 13, where it is even more detailed. It's easier to see the focal points. For example, the low E is more here, and E, an octave higher, is here somewhere at the end of the nose, and things like that. Of course, we have to find our own way doing this, but only such a picture, I think, can be quite inspiring. If we go to the next page, then you can see in the middle of the head here, there is a little line going up like that. And that is the soft palate here at the back and top. I have a personal memory about that because we had lessons with Alain Marion, and he had made some recording with Jesse Norman, and he came to us very excited and said that Jesse, she was always thinking about this up in the head inside here, and he said it works so nicely on the flute, and that is what Jesse did, as a Jesse Norman. And it's good to have a picture of it, because if we then continue to page, let's see here, it's 52. And I will briefly show you what you can then download in the document. Because when we're talking about what happens inside the mouth, if we are not working with phonetics and maybe singers, it's more easier for singers, I suppose, then these kind of drawings can help very much. These kind of drawings and models are made with what is called palatograms. There are two techniques. Earlier on, we used some kind of color and you colored the tongue, and then you said, for example, T, and then you had to make a photo of the tongue, and you could see where the color did rest. Or you could make radiogram, of course, with X-ray. And here you can then see, for example, a very common articulation syllable that we will discuss again, we did 2 days ago, is U, tu. Tu, 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 tu. And then you can see in figure 15 that the black areas is the hard palate, and where the tongue, so to speak, creates a kind of a tube, something, a tube-like thing. If you look at page 16, there you have the same vowel U. Also the word is pur in French language, pure in English. And then on the figure 16, you can see it from the side, and that the tongue goes quite much up. And that is a radiogram. And figure 17, that is a radiogram of when we say the consonant T. and non-aspirated T very much in the front of the mouth. And if we then continue, let's see here where we have it. We can look at the following page as a page 53. And here you can see a list of the common vowels. And there is the upper line in bold, that is the phonetical notation. Underneath you have a word in French, also loup, pur, pipe, feu, fait, côte, faire, seul, pôle, char, pat, parfum, pente, pont, fin. There we have the standard vowels. And now you know what you see. You see from the side, and you see what happens in the hard palate. And there we can, for example, see that pur makes a quite narrow passage of air in the front of the mouth, whereas if we say it's much bigger in the mouth, or feu, it's a very big opening in the mouth, or seul, for example, it opens much more. And then it easily becomes clear that the size of the cavity relates to different frequencies. We can continue, and let's see here, which page is that? Then I have made on the page 54 a very simple little exercise, and I invite you to try it if you have time, and if you would do it. I have given different points, and you have palatograms and from sides, so you know what happens. And I can assure you, if after a little practice, when we do these kind of things, something happens. Now, we can ask ourselves, is this something that will change my flute playing entirely? And I was no, not at all, because you already know it. And I think a criteria, when we feel we are in really good shape, now the flute makes what we want it to do. That is the criteria of that you do all these things intuitively. You simply do something, you are in balance, you have practiced, you're in a good period of your flute playing, and you can do it. So what I'm trying to do here is more to conceptualize and to bring up to the surface something that we already know how to do. And that connects also to the idea of maieustics, that basically we can do it, because if we couldn't do it, we couldn't speak so people could understand what we say. That is a simple proof of the whole thing. If you then continue to page 55, the next page, I think it should be there somewhere. Then you can see a systematic diagram covering all frequencies, also from the low B, if we have a B foot joint, up to the top D. And then you can see, as in the left, you have pitch, and the next column is then le son naturel in mezzo forte. And you have suggestions, you can use pipe, pur, loup. If you want to have a flattening effect, you can use the vowel, the nasal vowel, parfum, un. And if you want to have a sharpening effect, you can use E, as in fait. And then it continues like that. And we can find our own way through this, but it works quite well. What I didn't add here are all the frequencies, also the numbers of how many hertz it is. I have that in another document, and if someone would be interested, I would be happy to send it to you, of course. But I think that gives too much information. That's enough for the flutist when we practically should practice. And you could, sometimes put it on my music stand, and then I use it like that. I can go through the scales, for example, the Taffanel scales. If we then look at the next page, page 56, there is a very simple suggestion on twinkle, how you can use that, and in 3 octaves. So that's a da, da, dee, 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 etc. This is simply a suggestion, but the frequencies and the vowel sounds works. And then you can adopt it in your own way. you play it. That was all about the resonance thing. So if there are some questions, maybe we should take them now, as you like it, or we can continue.
Do we have questions, Toninho?
Sim, nós temos uma pergunta que é em relação ao Peter Lloyd, né, que o Anders falou muito sobre ele ontem. O Bruno pergunta, Anders,
Yes.
ele afirma, lendo um pouco sobre a história de Peter Lloyd, vi que ele sofria de asma. Gostaria de saber se ele falava sobre o assunto e se a asma o atrapalhava a tocar.
Yes, that's right. We talked about that many times, and he explained, because I obviously also asked him, how could you play the flute with asthma? And he said the reason why he started to play the flute was asthma, because the doctor said that would be a good cure for him to play the flute. And that was basically all. What he said about that, it was a good way. He did never mention that he suffered under something that he lack of sufficient air or support. But I think the asthma problem was connected to that he stopped to play the flute relatively early. I often asked him about why did you stop to play? I mean, you were so good. Why did you stop the flute when you were something like 62 or so? I can't remember exactly, 62, 61. And he said that he got a very bad pneumonia. And that was after that he had resigned from the orchestra. He had worked in the United States. I think that was Indiana. And he suffered then suddenly from a very bad pneumonia, and he had trouble to come back. And for that reason, he gave up more, we can say, playing in recitals and on stage. I'm happy because we have worked together in many masterclasses in England. So I said to Peter once, I want to say to my grandkids that I played with Peter Lloyd. So I forced him to play. We played some quartets together for flutes. So I said, I want to say to my grandkids, I played with Peter Lloyd. It was very funny. But apart from that, he didn't mention much about that. And my impression after so many hours, 15, almost 20 years of having him as a colleague, he never mentioned that it was a really bad thing. At the contrary, the flute helped him to recover from this. Do you have more questions on the subject?
Não temos mais perguntas. Acho que você pode continuar, Anders, com o próximo tópico.
Okay, then if we can go to page 58. I would like to read a text for you. And the text is what we can also read there, but I think that is an interesting text when we are little by little coming to the end. A tool is a tool created by humans for humans, out of the need and the will to do different things. The shovel is a tool to facilitate, which facilitates digging. Digging can be done with hands and feet, but the tool shovel facilitates digging. Therefore, shovels have been developed over the millennia in relation to snow, sand, and soil. The tool shovel has its dynamics in relation to where the used person lives and is, and thereby given conditions. Similarly, a musical instrument is a tool created by humans for humans with the purpose of becoming a tool for sound, for man to be able to express himself. A shovel or flute is a tool that involves a physical extension of the human body, and which through the functionality of the tool creates opportunities to realize intention that could not be realized without the tool. When an airstream is blown and broken against a sharp edge, a tone is generated as when whistling. In this phenomenon, the tool flute has its origin, obviously. There have been flutes since ancient times that have developed different expressions and flute sounds. The successive development of flutes has meant that the instrument, by virtue of its construction, elicits intrinsic possibilities, and in a way, it then plays itself. This can be likened to a maietic process in the same way as Socrates' famous metaphor that the teacher, with questions, the flute in this case, elicits intrinsic opportunities in the student, in this case, the flute player. To conclude, the flute plays the flutist. I remember I have heard or read a quote from Jean-Pierre Rampal when he was asked, when do you play the flute the best? When the flute plays by itself. And I think we can find many similar situations where it is like that. When we then look at the continuation of the text here, it deals with different things. For example, the character of the flute, and we are soon going to compare different flute methods. But what we can definitely say is that the potential character of the flute has greatly been influenced by the change that Theobald Böhm made when constructing the cylinder flute, also what we today play mostly. But that the main character of the flute since the Renaissance, if we talk about the Renaissance Traverso, I have one Renaissance Traverso here, I guess you all know what it is, but still, it's a very simple instrument. We did discuss that the other day with Raoul, I think. It's a very simple little instrument, but difficult to play compared with many other flutes. And then over time, the kind of featured character of the flutes did not change so much. If you have the Renaissance flute, you had the Traverso, you had the different kind of multi-keyed conical flutes. But then came the Böhm flute, the 1847 model. And up to that moment, basically, the characters expressed by flutes were kind of melancholic tunes, sometimes virtuosic and witty. If you think about the Badinerie in the B minor suite, and you know that Badinerie is not really a dance, it comes from badin or badinage, as a joke, joyful. And then little by little, because flutists since Michel Blavet and probably before has been impressed by the great violin virtuoso. If you think about the Blavet flute concerto, it is, as a matter of fact, quite similar to kind of Corelli-like music or Vivaldi concerto. And little by little, things then change. And then when the Böhm flute comes in, the low register is featured in a way that is not possible on the other flute models. There is a nice little quote, Marguerite Long, that was and Courtauld, these were important piano players. And Courtauld, he was a very famous pianist up to the 1960s, 70s, French. And when he was a young man, he was the accompanist to the flute class of Taffanel at the Paris Conservatoire. And Courtauld said in his book about piano play, what is more moving than a flute in the low register? And if you think about that, L'après-midi d'une faune by Claude Debussy, that, what is it, 1884, something like that, that is avant-garde use of a new instrument. Maybe you know, but I was very surprised. We know that the Ringklappenflöte, the Theobald Böhm's model from 1832, was used much longer in Germany than in other countries. And I thought until a couple of years ago that the Ringklappenflöte was used in Germany, in some cities, up to between the two world wars. But a couple of years ago, I found a source that made it completely crystal clear that the Ringklappenflöte was used in the Munich Opera Orchestra, the famous Munich Opera, up until the 1960s, which is quite stunning. I mean, after all, Theobald Böhm came from Munich, so nobody is a prophet in his or her own city. Böhm is the maximum example of that in the flute world. Anyhow, then little by little, the flute changes character, and This is inherent in the construction of the Böhm flute, the cylinder flute. There's no wonder that there came transcriptions of the César Franck Sonata, Cacciatorian flute concerto, or violin concerto originally, and things like that. Although I'm convinced that a player like Taffanel never played the César Franck Sonata, at least in a recital. The version was printed very early, the transcription of the César Franck Sonata, as you know, but that was more the kind of idea that you take a Beethoven symphony for four hands. There are no CDs, there is no sound equipment at home. So that was a way to make music at home. But then Jean-Pierre Rampal, basically after the 1945, it integrates this into the repertoire. But I think that is important when we then very soon will go and compare the different schools, flute methods. Also an important personality in this context is Louis Fleury. He was a star student from Paul Taffanel. He got his first prize, Premier Prix, and he was an homme de lettres, as we say in French. He was a stunning flutist, but he was also a great homme de lettres. He wrote many articles about the flutes. You can have good access to them. They're all translated into English and were published in the 1910 up to about 1925. And he advocated a style that was sober and not at all too flamboyant, a virtuosic style. And he would for sure not have liked the César Franck Sonata played on the flute. And there is a very interesting document regarding this, and that is in the Cobbett Encyclopedia of Woodwind Music. I think it was published a couple of years after that Fleury passed away, but there he made comments on the Reinecke Undine Sonata. And he writes, it's wonderful, the piece is good, etc., but it has a serious problem, and that is the finale. The finale is not good at all because it requires far too much dramatic expression, and that is not suited for the flute, according to Fleury. For myself, when I play the Reinecke Sonata, I think the last movement is the most challenging. I like the last the most, because that you go somewhere else. It's not the normal style of the period. And another interesting comment from Louis Fleury, and when we read the text by Fleury, we should understand it as he's a spokesman for Paul Taffanel and that camp, so to speak. And then he is angry, Fleury is angry on the virtuoso players of the 19th century, also Bricialdi, de Mersement. He said all these virtuoso players destroyed the reputation of the flute, because the composers thought that we only play this kind of virtuosic stuff, and that's not the point. That is interesting to give it a thought. So he was really upset about it. And as a matter of fact, I have been so much in France with the flute, and really I used to say I learned to play the flute thanks to La France, but I learned to make music thanks to Germany, in a sense, if you make it a little bit black and white. And as a matter of fact, if we dare to think the thought, one could be a bit upset for what I say now, but if we dare to think the thought, it is stunning how few top compositions there are from French composers. There are not so much, as a matter of fact. I mean, Debussy, he's the great exception. He wrote all his works not for Taffanel, not for Gaubert, not for the most famous flutists. And another thing that is interesting, that Ravel didn't write anything really for the flute. We have some chamber music, but the flute is not so important. The most important flute work, in a sense, is maybe Chanson Madicasse, the chamber music work. So that is good to know. And then, as the ideal for Fleury is Syrinx. And after all, Syrinx was premiered by Fleury. And he writes about that in a very interesting article from 1922, The Flute and Its Powers of Expression. And there he writes, to discover a feeling of melancholy, he has a long breathed phrase as the flute piece, Syrinx, or Debussy. He employs the lower octave. He indulges no temperamental explosions. He confines himself to the severest and soberest expression of great mental suffering. And he draws then in the article also a line to Orphée, the big flute solo that we talked about the other day. Finally, we can say that Syrinx, is not thanks to Debussy that it exists, because the initial reason why it exists is that Gabriel Mouret has written a piece, Psyché, and he wanted some music for this. And then he knew Debussy, and Debussy wrote the music. Many years later, Mouret wrote about Syrinx, and he wrote, "This piece is a real jewel of restrained emotion, of sadness, of plastic beauty, of discreet tenderness and poetry." This altogether is a kind of an aesthetic around what is a flute good at. A kind of melancholic, very expressive thing, but not in the explosive way. And it can be witty and virtuosic, of course, like the B minor suite and the Badneri. Finally, before we compare different flute methods, I would like to quote another Japanese swordsman, Munenori, because we can ask ourselves, and that was my initial comment on what we have been doing these days, quoting Otteter on the idea, if we have, can we communicate something with the written word and not the spoken word? So we can see within the flute environment, it has been discussed since 300 years. It is an interesting topic, as a matter of fact. I support the idea from Otteter. I would like to talk with Otteter about that. If we come to Paradise one day, I will try to look up Monsieur Otteter. Because I think he made a point. Of course, it is possible to communicate. But we can also problematize, because that has a point to problematize the written word and even the spoken word. And then that comes to Peter Lloyd and to Alain Marion. And we did discuss that yesterday. We can have a pendulum between the spoken word and understanding, together with intuitive method. Just I take up my flute, I get inspired from you, and yeah, things happen. Anyhow, in a book called The Sword and the Mind from 1632, this book discusses highly advanced skills of Japanese swordsmanship and learning. And of course, at that time, Japanese swordsmanship was no joke. It was a deadly, dangerous occupation when you go out there. So one can see what we can do. The book discusses highly advanced skills of this dangerous swordsmanship. And of course, it might seem a bit far away to put that in relation to flautistic learning. But I think it has a point, because there are similarities between any craftsmanship, if it's the flute or the sword or singing or making, even gardening, whatever you want. And therefore, I want to read this quote for you, and that is, learning is the gateway to the way. If you pass through the gate, you reach the way. Learning is the gateway, not the house. Do not confuse the gateway with the house. The house is behind the gateway. Because learning is the gateway, don't think the books you can read represent the way. Books are gateways to find the way. Also, we can say the books, in a sense, are guidelines. What we're talking about all the time now are, even with these references of these fantastic people that we are talking about, like Rampal and all the others, of course, like the midwife. And exactly as Altes wrote in his important book, and as we did talk about yesterday, the teacher, there is a point where the teacher has to accept that we can't do anything. Like the midwife, however much he wants to help the woman being in trouble with giving birth, she can't do very much, but she can give guidelines. Okay, now I think we go to page 60. We can make it relatively briefly. We can look at... Yes?
Eu acho que antes de você ir para
Oh, you have a question, maybe?
Nós temos duas perguntas aqui.
Yes? Of course. Of course.
Uma é do nosso amigo flautista de Porto Alegre, Arthur Elias.
I think I know him, yes.
Ele pergunta, ele fala: apesar de todas essas possibilidades de investigação e exploração do próprio corpo neste campo da ressonância da flauta, né? Você acredita que no final das contas e nas situações de alta exigência, um flautista é realmente capaz de soar diferente daquilo que, digamos assim, a natureza lhe deu, da forma como ele é fisicamente, né? E ele completa a pergunta: pois não é um fato conhecido que cada flautista soa de uma forma característica a ele, né? Que tende a não mudar, mesmo quando muda de instrumento?
Okay, I will try to answer on the question. It is obvious that we can hear immediately, if you think about children, for example, we can hear this is children 1, this is children 2, this is children 3. We can hear that immediately. We can recognize voices from friends, relatives immediately, in an instant of a second. I would say there is no, and that connects to what the motto that we had in the very beginning, and it connects to the motto from Pierre Baillot, the great French violin professor in Paris in the Beethoven time. When you are younger, look up a model. Even you try the most you can't get exactly the same sound on the other one. We could also say, why should we? There is no reason that if we sound too close to someone else, that makes no sense. Of course, our body, exactly as you said, has its dimensions. They are similar, but they are not identical. In other words, exactly as you said, if player X plays for a while on flute 1, and then the same player changes to flute 2 and to flute 3 and to flute 4, we will be able to recognize the personal sound, definitely. And I think the whole idea about working with resonance focal points, maybe using vowels as a help, this is not for developing something that should sound like, if I could imagine myself when I was a young man, I would like to sound like Jean-Pierre Rampal. I think I could go in that direction, because some people told me, we can hear where would you like. But of course, and that has not to do that I couldn't play as good. Of course, I couldn't play the flute as good as Jean-Pierre Rampal, but maybe for Syrinx, it doesn't make such a big difference, because the capacity to master that piece is not the same as for all pieces. The whole point is, of course, to develop your own voice. There was, I had discussions with Alain Marion on that subject, and he said, in tone development exercises, all that kind of things, you should never imitate another sound. You should develop your own voice. And I think that is exactly what we should do. But the suggestions regarding resonance focal points and, for example, vowels, these methods or techniques are all there to develop your personal voice. And I personally can see no reason to however attractive it would be to get the same sound as Jean-Pierre Rampal that he was when he was in his absolutely best. That would, of course, be nice, but I don't see the deeper point in that. Not at all. And I think that is a little bit of a problem of today's flute playing. When I was a student, as an academy music student, it was the first part of the 1970s. When I studied in Salzburg for a little while with Karl-Heinz Zöller, it was entirely different style than my teacher that came from the Paris Conservatoire. And when I studied a little bit in Italy with Severino Gazzoloni, was again an entirely different style. I all the time preferred personally the French-minded style, the Paris school, we could say in a sense, and especially the version promoted by Jean-Pierre Rampal and Marion. But I enjoyed very much this typical German style from Karl-Heinz Zöller. I thought that was wonderful to hear. And I had classmates from Salzburg, which were really good flute players, but we played very differently. And I would not say that they play better than me or vice versa. No, that was not the point. But the very different aesthetics. And I think that is a wonderful thing. Gazzoloni was the same. Is that something that could be of interest for you, Arthur?
O Arthur não está aqui online, mas depois ele responder no chat a gente retorna, Anders.
Now I think I can't hear.
Tem mais uma pergunta? A Olivia faz uma pergunta sobre a questão de formação dos dentes e usar aparelho para correção da formação dentária, né? Ela pergunta: meus dentes incisivos inferiores são bem separados. Não sei o quanto influencia, mas tenho medo de pôr aparelho e atrapalhar minha embocadura. Você tem alguma experiência na questão de ensinar alunos com aparelho para correção dentária, crianças ou adultos?
Yes, I have, because for a while I taught in a music school, and there were very many children, and many children have these for their teeth. That was interesting to see when these youngsters, when they started without having it, and then they got it, and then after a year or 2 or 3, they didn't need it anymore. One part, I have never had it myself, so I don't know, but when I asked these kids about it, they said in the beginning at least it did hurt them a little bit when they played on the flute. But I was always surprised how well they adopted to it. I was really surprised about that. So consider that you're not going to keep it for a very long time. I would guess it's not a very big issue, but if you would keep it for a very long time, consider that the body is very flexible in a sense. I would guess that would not be a big problem. But what I could imagine is if you, for example, have it on the lower teeth here, and you would then press the flute against that with these metal things, that would definitely hurt. But to try to find something positive in that, I would say maybe that would improve your technique in the sense that you should not press too hard against your chin and the lip. So you have to learn a technique that is very supple. I don't know if that is an answer on your question, but I have had quite some kids when I taught kids with this thing, but I was surprised that they could adopt fast, and consider it nowadays with the technology regarding teeth and dentists. It was a very dangerous business just 50, 60, 70 years ago. If you had trouble here in the front with your teeth, that was the end of career. Nowadays, it's fortunately not as bad. So I would not be very worried about that, but be observant, speak with my teacher or classmates. Is that good so, or should we?
Muito bom. Agora, uma próxima pergunta da Clara Nascimento. Ela pergunta sobre os aspectos relacionados à transmissão de emoção ou afetos na performance. É possível que um intérprete que não conheça verdadeiramente a melancolia que vemos na história de Syrinx, do Debussy, né, e o Deus Pan, possa transmitir esses sentimentos no momento da performance?
Yeah, thank you very much. That is a tricky question. Indeed. That's one of the key questions in art, of course. Okay, I will try to explain something at least. I'll show you something because I thought it might come up. Can you see I have two of those? Here's a tuning fork, 442, with resonance box. Here's another tuning fork, 442. If I then do like this, I don't think that will be transmitted, but then the second tuning fork starts to ring. This is probably touching your question quite much, because of course we can't force anyone to have the same feeling as you have, and I would say we should never do it. We must respect the individuality of each of us. But if you are exactly as Jesse Norman, in the quote that I gave you the first day, Jesse Norman's claimed, and I think that was so well said. She said, the way you breathe in must be drenched into the emotion that you are going to sing. And so much that when you breathe, it is not necessary to sing. In the same way as when we encounter a person, we know the person is breathing and we know that we burst out in a laughter. Or we can see, ooh, or we can feel, ooh, now I said something wrong. The person is very hurt and will start to cry, for example. If we go back in the history, how is these kind of very complicated issues described? I would go to Carl Philipp Emanuel Bach. In Carl Philipp Emanuel Bach's big book of the true art playing the piano, or the harpsichord better, which we should know, that was, I think, 1754, if I remember. We should really study the book. And a little detail is that when Beethoven was teaching the piano to Czerny, for example, 1804, 1805, something like that, the first thing he said to young Czerny was get hold of the book by Carl Philipp Emanuel Bach. And then one can think, Beethoven, Carl Philipp Emanuel Bach, did he deal with historical performance practice? Of course not. The time in distance is 50 years between when Beethoven used it as a book in his teaching and when Carl Philipp Emanuel Bach wrote it. We can use de la sonorité that is 90 years old by now. But Carl Philipp Emanuel Bach writes an interesting thing that connects to your question, saying that if the performer is not experiencing or having been touched, being moved by the music performed, it is an illusion that the listener should be touched by the way you play. This can be questioned, it can be problematized. I gave an example, it was yesterday or the day before, when a 10-year-old boy in Finland played Orfeo, the D minor solo. He was young, he had not a perfect technique, but his emotions was there. And he could make us having tears in our eyes. And he was too young to know about love is an incredible thing, but it can also be incredible suffering. And I didn't want to talk about that with a young man being 10 years old. So that is one track into your question. I think there is also something else linked to your question, that we got to be sincere when we do things. That we don't pretend to do things. It becomes too flamboyant, what we could easily call it gets superficial simply. We must be a little bit careful with that. And maybe that also connects to the idea when some people say that, ooh, you're just 16 years old, you can't play that piece, because of course you can play it better than everybody technically, but you don't have the emotion for doing that. I have heard that kind of comment when I was young, and I guess many of you now listening have heard that kind of comments. there is a truth in it, but it's also problematic truth. I mean, life continues, you experience more and more things in life. And I would say that with age, you have experienced incredible things on the plus side, but also on the minus side. And maybe then the more grown up, mature, we can use the concept of being mature, should have some kind of effect. I don't believe that if a performer is just knocking down the piece, I don't think that will transmit so very much, as a matter of fact. And when I was an orchestra player, I can remember we played some Bruckner symphony, which maybe connects to your question also. Played a Bruckner symphony, and there was a fight between the conductor and us, the orchestra. So we were not friends. Then we came to the performance, and we thought intuitively, I think all of us, that the conductor was great when we were playing. And he had tears in his eyes because his big thick glasses got, he couldn't really see because it got so vapor. And the emotion was transmitted in a way or another. It's not easy to give answers on this because there's this long discussion also we could connect to Diderot that wrote the book Le Paradoxe de Comédien, where there is a discussion about that the actor does not need to feel what they express. It's a problematic thing. I have a good friend, he works with theater theory. A final comment on the subject is, if you look into the Theobald Böhm book, Die Flöte und das Flötenspiel, the flute and flute playing, from 1871, there is a very interesting and important section on interpretation, where Böhm insists on that the answer, what you are talking about, is the text of a song. So you must study the text, you must play tunes as melodies, and then continue in your interpretation. This I have used, I can tell you, all of you, very briefly. If you think about the song Erlkönig by Schubert, there we have a boy that is going to die. We have this disgusting elfin king. We have the father, and we have the narrator. So what I have done quite sometimes in classes is that we take up 4 flute players on stage. Everybody must prepare everything. 4 flute players on stage. You are the father, you are the narrator, you are the disgusting elfin king, and you are the boy. And we use the text as a point of departure. And then we try to drench each thing because there's not much to play. And then we swap parts. There is another song that is very good for this, also by Schubert, The Death and the Maiden. That is a dialogue between death and a young woman. And that has been proven when I use that in my teaching. And one has to be careful. I used it also when it was the ex-Yugoslavian wars, and I had students from ex-Yugoslavia. So I was very careful not to hurt them, because they have had family that was killed in the war. But I must say, if you have a student, could be a young man or young woman, in their 20s, and you really dig into that text. And as I then tell them, imagine now that you look in that the right corner of the room, there stands death. And you know the old saying, if you see death, you are the chosen one today. You can't do anything. That has made a profound impact on students. I must be careful while using that song, because it can be quite a shocking experience. So I support the idea from Carl Philipp Emanuel Bach, for example. At the same time, we can say, if you're so taken away by what you're going to play, then you maybe can't articulate it. If you burst into tears so much, so you can't control yourselves, then you can't communicate it. And what I also use to talk about in this very, very interesting topic is that if we watch the person reading the news, when we watch the 8 o'clock news, something like that, If that person, they're talking about horrible things, so many dead people in a catastrophe or war or whatever, if that was start simply to cry all the time, we couldn't understand what they're saying. So there is a balance between being involved, but at the same time being capable of transmitting this thing. An interesting piece is, for example, Martin Ballade, that we can say, what is it telling us? Probably not too funny a story. I hope that is partly an answer on your question. It's a very complicated question, but interesting, I must say. Thank you.
Thank you, Anders.
Do we have a little time, or should we take more questions just to show you the pattern for the comparison of flute methods?
It's better if you go on.
Yes, okay. I will just show the pattern. If we could go to page 80, please, because then it's the same pattern going throughout. So on page 80, you have a kind of a model. It follows the same model all the time. Let's see, where is it? It's a little bit later. Sorry, page 60. That's my fault. Page 60. Sorry. There we are. And there you can see there are 10 different tables like this. And they're all organized like traverso, multi-keyed conical flutes, ringklappenflöte, and the Böhm flute. And the very first one you have here deals with descriptions regarding the tonal character of the traverso, the multi-keyed conical flute, ringklappenflöte, and the Böhm flute, as found in French flute methods. Now, this is an English translation. Some of the later methods, like Taffanel and Altès, have translations, and Altès in the Carrachet version. The rest are most of the time not in English. In the appendix to the document that you can download, there you have the original French text. But here you can then see, and I just show the idea how I wanted to express it. In this first document, you can see the sound is, how should the sound be? It should be round, well-nourished, even, clean. Yeah, there was a question yesterday about the different registers. Full and sonorous. Beautiful sound is male in the low register. Yeah, that's a special expression nowadays. Round and smooth and velvetity in the high register. Multi-keyed conical flutes, etc. And then what you will see when you compare these four, we can say layers, is that they basically the same. It doesn't change very much over time. It's almost the same. And that is, of course, an indication of a tradition that is fairly intact. So they advocate the same ideas. Then if you go to the next the next page, there you can find descriptions of the flute from dictionaries and methods of instrumentation. And that's also very similar. An interesting thing is that Hauteterre does not give a clear-cut definition of the flute sound and the flute character. So one has to try to find it indirectly. And when you then have a chance to read through these kind of things, you will see, if you go to the next, to number 2-3, descriptions regarding posture and playing. That's very, very similar all the time. One that is strikingly similar is, let's see here, that is on page 65. That is 2-6. Descriptions regarding how to blow the Airstream. And if it's a traverso, a multi-keyed conical one, a ringklappenflöte, and Böhm, basically exactly the same thing that they say. And this way of to blow the Airstream with moderation, that I didn't translate, as a matter of fact, because I think it's so easy to understand the words there for you with the Latin language. That has to do with what we call inhalare la voce. And there are some quotes in the text as that, you know, that is a term from singing, inhalarla, which is that you don't push out the air. And I think it's a good example, what you can see there, that the tradition is rather intact. You can also see, if we go to descriptions regarding songfilet, that's the next one on page 66. When we read through that, that is the same instruction. What is interesting with songfilet as a crescendo and diminuendo is that it is basically highlighted as the most important exercise to create the flexibility of the sound and to really to fight a monotonous sound. There are also comments like to achieve a beautiful sound is necessary to support, inflate, and decrease the sound. This rule is essential. It is the safest way to acquire beautiful sound, Berbigier. And they all say the same thing. Something that is revealing is that Taffanella Gobert in the book 1923 says the same, and they also insist it's a difficult technique, at least if you don't know how to practice it. So there you have an example of a kind of a systematic way of looking at how you can refine your flute playing. There, if we look at, we can continue. And let's see, if we look at the next one, 228, page 67. There we have articulation syllabus. And you have traverso, multiple conical flutes, exactly as before. And then you can see it is really a compact idea that the U, the E, the E, basically is what we use. If we use two on the traverso or the multi-keyed one, the ringklappenflute, the bone flute, what we play today, well, basically the same. With the variations, of course, from personal way to pronounce. The same if you go to the next 2-9, that has to do with double tonguing, triple tonguing, compound, punctuated rhythms and things like that. You can also see that it's quite an agreement that these things works very well all together. Which of course shows that within the French flute tradition, there is a kind of consensus that goes over centuries. But definitely something has happened and changing, and with good rights in from my point of view, that is that we could enlarge the possibilities of the flutes. And I think pieces like César Franck Sonata, of course, Reinecke Sonata, Cacciaturian, is a bit enigmatic why Rampal got so much in loving Cacciaturian. Of course, the tunes are fantastic, but still. And I think that is something that is built into the Böhm flute also. There is a possibility for this. And I think there is also a need or a desire from flute players wanting to express something more than the elegancy. And so coming back, and that relates to the question we just heard from Clara. If you think about a piece like Cassandra's Dream Song, which is Brian Ferneyhough, 1970, which in my opinion is one of the absolutely unbelievable flute pieces, like it or dislike it. Maybe if I could choose to play Brian Ferneyhough, Cassandra, or De Vienne Seventh Concerto, I would probably choose the De Vienne Seventh Concerto because I really like that elegant virtuosic style. But coming back to the question of emotion, because what we're talking about is emotion and expression, I sometimes tell my students, what is then the point in Cassandra's Dream Song? Yeah, that's not the extended techniques. That's not so interesting in a sense. They are there to express something you can't do with the normal technique. And after all, if you count all the notes in Cassandra's Dream Song, 48% is normal playing, 52% is extended technique. I asked a student when she wrote her examination paper to count all the notes, and she wrote it good as an Icelandic student. The incredible thing in Cassandra's Dream Song is that it goes beyond what you could imagine that the flute could express. this kind of hypertension is unbelievable as a Cassandra. One should not draw too much on Cassandra and the love story with Apollo. But I think the point what Fernier wanted to express, and that relates exactly to the changes over time in the French tradition, and also to the question from Clara. I used to tell the student, this is something that you have never experienced before, but imagine, you know that in the basement of the conservatoire is a dirty bomb. You know, a dirty bomb is something with very much radioactive material. This is in the basement of the house. God knows why you know it. The bomb is so damn powerful, so it will blow out the whole city and a bit more. And everybody will contaminate it with radiation. You know it. You go down, you run down to the reception and tell them, for God's sake, everybody must leave the school immediately, as soon as possible, and put it out in the radios and the television, everything. And you go, then we say, okay. We can call a doctor. We can call a doctor. We will call the ambulance now. We can see it's something wrong here. No. I know there is a bomb. Now it's 29 minutes left. We still have time to do something. Okay, calm down. This incredible frustration that, of course, Cassandra goes through, knowing that what will happen, because, as we know, Cassandra, in Homer, in the Iliad, the Trojan War, Apollo loved her and gave her an incredible gift, very useful when you are at war. She would know the future. She turned him down. She got a second gift. Nobody will believe you. That is a cruel gift that made her into a hysterical person. She knew what would happen when the Greeks would invade the city, but nobody believed her. I think that is so incredible, that piece, Cassandra's Dream Song, and especially the last sequence, the very last thing in that piece, the last line and the middle of the last line to the end. It is a phrase comparable to L'après-midi d'une faune, or to Sirène, something like that, because then the flute takes a step that goes far beyond the wildest fantasy of Paul Taffanel and Goubert. And all respect for these players, but it goes in the wildest fantasy that would condemn that as hopeless. That is a way to look at the tradition, and it gives freedom at the same time, of course, all these methods. And I would say, maybe to conclude, when it comes to these different ideas about tradition and freedom and learning, until now, I haven't found a better tool to develop idiomatics of playing the flute than what the French tradition has contributed with. I still stand for that. I'm not so sure that the French tradition developed the track expression. Some, of course, did, many did, but that is not really in the style, because there is another aesthetics, more elegant. I like it myself very much, but as I said, with this praise of Cassandra's Dreams, and there is also another possibility in the flute. And I think Fleury was partly right, that unfortunately the virtuoso player that wanted to be flamboyant, they destroyed the motivation for some composers to write for the flute. I guess you know Pierre Chausson, his poem for violin. Yeah, why isn't there a piece like that by Chausson for the flute? I guess you know for bassoon, the Saint-Saëns Sonata for bassoon and piano. They asked me in England, can't you find, you make research on this, can't you find this, the Saint-Saëns Sonata that was written for Taffanel? Because they apparently were very good friends. We don't have it. There is nothing like that. And that is interesting. I can give you another example. I asked some quite important and famous flute players in the Paris area about 20 years ago, the important ones. I said, why didn't you ask Olivier Messiaen to write another 5 birds for the flute? Because we only have Le Merle Noir. And they said to me, yes, Anders, good idea. But you know, he was tired after that he has written his opera, San Francisco's. So hang on, he was not tired in the 60s and the 70s. Someone could have asked him. No, and they said to me, good idea. And of course it is a good idea, but they should have asked. And I think that is maybe mirroring something with the development or changes of the flute. But I still really stand for that the French tradition when it comes to the craftsmanship of playing the flute is incredible. Absolutely incredible. You can, with the flexibility and all these techniques which are so well formulated, and also over time, there have been so many incredible players over 300 years time, and they also wrote down what they thought about flute playing, and that is really nice. I don't know, I don't want to hurt anybody, but if you compare facsimile editions of flute methods, that is by Fussot, the French editor, they have made something, everything from Otteter up to about 1900. There's so many volumes, very nice editions. If it's a piano, it's like that, and for the violin, they're 3 times more. But if I may, and it's not a joke, if you look at oboe and bassoon, it's so much. The flutes still have very, very much. And therefore we are blessed by this. And I think I really say chapeau to the French flute players that they did write it down also. There's also thanks to the Paris Conservatoire that they wrote it down, because systematically, as we said the other day, they made new revisions of methods for each instrument. And there is a treasure to go through. And I did make some quotes, as you can see in these 10 tables. And if you have time to read through my manuscript, you will find more of this. And if you have further questions, contact me. I would be happy to answer your questions. I think that is what we do now, because you can then work on your own if you have time and interest with the manuscript.
Okay, thank you, Anders. So, Toninho, could you pass the questions?
Sim, vamos lá. Temos mais algumas perguntas, Anders. Paulo Ferreira pergunta: o que você acha de abordagens modernas no estudo e ensino da flauta que utilizam técnicas estendidas?
I think that was something in the transmission of the sound. Can you please say it one more time? It was, now I can hear it. To give a very short answer, I think it's good. I use it very much myself. Of course it's good. All techniques are good. And I think extended techniques can be very useful. I also think that circular breathing can be very useful. I also practice that. I never use it because I don't think it's necessary. I don't need it. But I think it is a very useful thing, because you learn how to master your breathing out and in the nose and mouth. I think extended techniques can be very interesting to work on. Not to praise myself, but at our Academy of Music, the Lundt University, we are the university in the Nordic countries that works the most with music after 1945. So all my students, when they have made their final examinations, they have played the Boulez Sonatina, Brian Fernie, How Cassandra Streams, and Takumitsu Voice, of course, Berio, and these more classic things. And I have asked many composers to write pieces for us, and for different kinds of flute, contrabasso flute, other flutes. So I think it's a highly important part of the repertoire. The techniques by themselves are maybe not so interesting, and I try to understand them as when you can't express what you want to express with the normal technique, with the conventional technique, then thank God we have the extended techniques. And just a funny example is that I had an incredibly talented student. I think that's the best Swedish student I ever had. She had a super embouchure gift. And she didn't like that kind of music. It was difficult to get her to play it. And I asked, do you practice flutter tonguing? And she was good at the flutter tonguing here back in the mouth. And she said, yeah, every day. He said, but you of all, why do you do it? Because you don't like the music where you can use it. She thought that it improved her sound. And I think if you work on multiphonics, if you work on all these things, of course it is good. To work on pizzicato, it speeds up your tonguing because you use much less effort when you play normal. No, so my personal opinion is it's a great thing to work on. And also that it opens the door for expressions, emotions that you can't express with the conventional technique. So I have no problem with it at all. At the contrary, I think it's important.
Agora, a próxima pergunta, também do nosso colega flautista do Rio, Eugênio Hanevski. Ele diz, já que citou a performance musical na Alemanha, gostaria de saber do professor Anders como ele acha que deve ser a interpretação de Bach, do compositor Johann Sebastian Bach, né? Como na época ou com a evolução dos nossos instrumentos, com mais liberdade de expressão.
Okay, I will try to answer a very complicated question. And first of all, we have to consider that the flute music by Johann Sebastian Bach is not written for our flute, it's written for the traverso. Saying that, I don't say that it's not possible to do it very well on our flute. Of course it is possible. We just look at the piano repertoire, also the hopscotch repertoire that works very nicely on the piano as well. But of course, if we learn to play, at least for ourselves, a bit of the traverso, I think it sheds lights on possibilities in the music by Johann Sebastian Bach and the complete repertoire of the 18th century that basically is for the one-keyed traverso. Then if we think about, now the topic for my 3 days was French flute tradition, but I would absolutely insist on that there are very interesting things in many countries in the world. And of course, also in Germany, very interesting things. Just a little spin-off to your question is that a repertoire, which I think is unjustly almost never played, is German flute music from late 19th century up to the First World War, something like that. Maybe to middle, between the big wars. I would give an example. The second movement of this Hindemith sonata, sehr langsam, also very slow, is, I think, a wonderful movement. This movement with that kind of expression could never have been written in France. And I must say, although, as you can understand, I'm very much involved in the French tradition, I must say that unjustly, I think that the French morceau de concours is a little bit overdone. We don't need to play so much from them, but they are, of course, very good pieces. So maybe you have heard about a composer called Hermann Ambrosius. He is a German composer, and he got lost when Germany became DDR and things like that. Anyhow, he wrote a huge flute sonata, something like 1921, 1922, much more complicated than Prokofiev. Sounds a little bit like Max Reger. There is a kind of an expression in the German flute music which is different. And maybe also when Fleury criticized the Reinecke sonata, the last movement, the Germans did it. And we should remember, Theobald Böhm was German. And the funny thing is that in the Baroque, as you know, of course, the traverso were called la flûte allemande, the German flute. But coming back to Bach, of course, a short comment on how Bach should be interpreted is, of course, impossible because it's a universe. But I think what one could do is, first of all, to study some sources. It could be Mattheson, not necessarily Carl Philipp Emanuel Bach, a little bit earlier sources, and read them in a flexible way. We can study Quantz also. But consider that I am also very interested in the traverso and work a lot with it. My conclusion is that there is much more freedom than we think. And my conclusion is also that sometimes when someone is teaching a Bach sonata, it gets far too strict often. And suddenly we have to fulfill rules all the time. And I don't believe for a fraction of a second on that. At the contrary, if you study Hauteterre, he was French, but that is the same period as Johann Sebastian Bach, precisely the same period. There is a kind of pragmatism also. Otteta describes how to do this and that, and then it comes a paragraph. Yeah, and if that doesn't work, you do it your way, which is quite an interesting one. Also an interesting thought is that when Quantz wrote his book, and it was published 1752, what he writes about music there is what he thought when he wrote his book. Did he really think the same thing 1747 in October 10th as when he did put it on paper, maybe 1751 in June 3rd? So music is so flexible. So I think there are very many possibilities. I mean, even though if one would play the Bach suites like Casals played them in the beginning of the 20th century when it was rediscovered, can we say that that is not good because he played it in his way he played it? I would not say so. He played it his way, and that is possible. I remember when I was an orchestra player that once we had Mstislav Rostropovich as a soloist, and he played the Dvorak Concerto, of course, and then his encore, his piece, that was the Sarabande from the C minor's cello suite. And I'm sure you're familiar. But Rostropovich, he was in such a super shape, so he played a tempo like this. So he could carry in a tempo that compared with the normal concept of saraband was ridiculously slow. What was then what could we say about that? Was it bad or not? No, it was of course fantastic. And I think that mirrors very well the possibility in this. I would be very careful. Sometimes we can have a stupid name on that. We can say the Baroque police. I would be very careful with the Baroque police because I think they were more flexible than we think. And we can also make another experimental thought. If you think about Mahler's Fifth Symphony, I think all of us perceive that music as really profoundly emotional the whole way throughout. And if we would imagine that nobody would play that music for the next 150 years. And what we have are written down comments on how it was played. I'm not so convinced that that would be possible to reconstruct because the tradition is still around us. And that is a good challenge of thought when it comes to these kind of things. And at the same time, when we look at the score from a Mahler, there are many of you are orchestra players. When we look at in the Mahler's parts, the whole score, it's over detailed in a sense because every note has a little mark for what to do with it, and still it sounds so emotionally outbursting in a sense. So I would use what was the motto for the 3 days, the motto from Kant, Immanuel Kant. We must use our own mind, we must use our own thought, and we must be courageous to do that. About 20 years ago, when I played Bach sonatas and so, and Brandenburg concertos, not in Germany, but in Sweden, you play that on the Böhm flute, they said, bad. And I said, why is it bad? Yes, because you should play Traverso, then it's good. So, and I said, are you really serious about that? That it's better just because I changed flute, it's the same flutist. I can play both, but probably I play the Böhm flute a bit better after all. So flexibility, but to build up a good backbone, so to speak, I would encourage studying the sources, put the sources against each other, and if you don't already play the Traverso, I would say try to get hold of a Traverso. In a sense, I would say something that sounds ridiculously stupid. Don't ask anyone to show you. Do it yourself. Because if you can play the Bach sonatas on the standard Böhm flute, then you know enough flutes to discover what you can do with the Traverso. And let the flute teach you. As I said earlier on, let the instrument be friend with the flute. I like dogs very much. And maybe you also have a dog. Some of you definitely must have. There is sometimes when we are in pressure in time, we can't let the dog walk exactly as he or she wants to do. But it's a nice feel to go with your dog and let the dog decide. You know, when they go all over, they read what we call the dog news. Oh, that's what the other dog was here, the Rottweiler was there and stuff. And it's very nice to let the dog decide where to go. And I would say, let the flute guide you through. And I think you would find something. The topic is enormous when it comes to Bach sonatas, but and Bach as a whole. But don't let anyone push you down, because I have seen that in the scene of people in the circles of historical performance practice. But I'm blessed having friends that belongs to the Musik Antiqua Köln. That was one of the great ensembles in the 1980s and 90s. And they're good friends of mine. And their flexibility was always surprising. They were not really dogmatic. I hope that is a part answer. You can send me a letter, and then when we can have a correspondence on the subject.
Thank you, thank you very much, Anders. So, unfortunately, we will ask you to give your final words because we are running out of time. But
of course,
if you could, please tell us how was it for you, and how could we close this nice.
Yes, I think what we can say is that your enthusiasm doing all these things, I really hope you will carry on doing these kind of things, because it is a wonderful example, and it's not so often that a festival circles around the process of learning and integrating research and all these possibilities that we have nowadays. Also consider that you have, and I'm very happy to have learned to know so many of you in many cities, students and professional colleagues. And all the time when people ask me, you really seems to like Latin America and especially Brazil, I say, yes, I can't do everything than like what you do there. It can be that you have music in a context. I could remember in Salvador, we went to kind of cultural schools in very dangerous areas. And last time I was in Salvador, I wanted to return, and they said no. Now it was too dangerous to go there. And we have played music, and we have done things like that. Music school on the beach, like old Madame Odette and things like that. Incredible stuff. And what you do is at universities, when I have been visiting many of your universities in Belo Horizonte, I was very impressed, and in Porto Alegre, Tonino is your city, Salvador and Brasilia, Curitiba, incredible things what you're doing. So what I would say is just carry on, because it's so great. And if I would be personal, I would say I would really like to be part of your wonderful journey also. I would always be available, of course, for you. I think that is what we can say. Your enthusiasm and your motivation, I think, is absolutely fantastic. And also brilliant flute playing. I will never forget the first evening I was in Fortaleza listening to all these players. I thought, yes, Latin America is fun, and it's nice to go swimming all the day. And I was very happy. I said to myself in the evening, well done, Anders. You prepared us always as much as you could. Because they were good. You were good. And I think that is really a wonderful thing. And also composers, Maurizio, for example, is that I've learned to know, thanks to you, Valentina, and thanks to you, Antonio, Tonino, when we were in your festival, in your city with research. Actually, it's impressive. And I'm very proud that I have had quite some students coming from your country to my school, and we have worked together. I'm very happy for that, because it have learned me many things too, very many things. And that we can, as Europeans, we can learn very many things from you. And not only social projects, of course, we can learn from that too, I think, but also from your wonderful flute playing and your enthusiasm. That's fantastic. So thank you very much. And I wish you good luck.
Very much. We are so lucky to have you, and we can't thank you enough for this rich material that you gave to our association. So I think that Toninho also wants to talk to you, to give his thank you and his final words. Thank you very much, Anders.
Anders, gostaria de agradecer em nome da Abraf, né, pela sua amizade longa com a Abraf, com os flautistas brasileiros, com todos nós aqui, né? No chat do YouTube, nós recebemos muitos elogios e agradecimentos pela sua disponibilidade que teve aqui conosco, maravilhoso mesmo, muito obrigado por esses 3 dias aqui, e que a nossa amizade continue, né, dos flautistas brasileiros e você, né, e a nossa amizade entre todos nós continue. Realmente muito obrigado. Eu gostaria de dizer que as perguntas que não foram respondidas, nós encaminharemos para o professor Anders, tá? E depois, posteriormente, possam ser respondidas. E muito obrigado. Eu acho que nós podemos encerrar o nosso evento aqui, né? E que mais eventos lindos como esse venham. Obrigado a todos que participaram, né? E não sei se o Raul quer colocar alguma coisa também, Ariadne.
Então, muito obrigado, Anders, foi maravilhoso. Eu estou vendo aqui muitos aplausos na tela. Isso é muito emocionante de ver isso num momento de pandemia, mas as pessoas estão aplaudindo. Os 3 dias foram incríveis. Muito, muito obrigado. Esse material vai ser enriquecedor para a tradição da flauta no Brasil, congregando as possibilidades, as habilidades e todas as culturas, que isso é maravilhoso. Muito obrigado.
E eu queria agradecer mais uma vez, dizendo que para nós é uma grande sorte de ter um amigo como você junto a nós. Você sabe que não é você tem esses amigos aqui no Brasil e que você tem nos ajudado muito a crescer enquanto flautistas, enquanto professores. Muito obrigada, Anders.
Thank you, all of you. I'm very happy to hear. And I really hope we will carry on. And if you have ideas, I mean, I'm not an oracle. I might have questions to you too. That would interest me a lot. So, and I would be very happy to discuss. For example, I know that you are with the vowel thing, etc. And with all of you, I would be really happy to have continue an exchange with all of you. It's really wonderful, I must say. So, good luck for the concert tonight. I imagine there would be 177 flute players in little boxes all over Brazil and other places. So, but be careful. It's dangerous for flutists to get this horrible COVID thing. It's really dangerous stuff. So, and again, I would really thank you, all the staff, Rogério, and all of you for having invited me to this very, very interesting and a nice event, your festival. So, all the best.
Bom, Anders, eu gostaria de agradecer muito a sua presença. Você que já é o nosso companheiro da Abraf já desde 2002, eu acho que eu me lembro, né? Raul, hoje, de Fortaleza. E então participou de tantos festivais, tantas coisas, e continua ajudando os flautistas brasileiros. Queria agradecer muito, foi muito enriquecedor para todos aqui. Muito obrigado.
E agora só anunciar os próximos eventos de hoje, né, Rogério? Todo mundo, às 16h30, nós teremos uma mesa redonda.
I leave you now.
Ok, Anders?
You can stay there.
Bye. Ciao.
Tchau.
Tchau, Anders. Até mais. Mas então, só aqui, anunciando os próximos eventos, às 16h30, a mesa redonda, arranjos e composições para orquestras de flautas, com Davi Gank, Alexandre Daloia, César Michiles, né? Murilo Barquete e a mediação do Beto Sampaio. E às 19 horas, o encerramento com a Orquestra de Flautas da ABRAF.